Welcome to our Exegetical Conversations. This podcast invites listeners into thoughtful dialogue about sacred texts, especially the Bible, through the lens of careful interpretation and historical understanding. Our goal is not simply to repeat familiar doctrines or defend inherited traditions, but to explore what these ancient writings may have meant to the people who first heard them, and what wisdom they might still offer through thoughtful readers today. The word comes from the Greek exegesthai, meaning to lead out or to draw out. In biblical studies, exegesis refers to the careful effort to draw meaning out of the text itself, to understand its historical setting, its language, its literary structure, and the intentions of its authors. This approach stands in contrast to eisegesis, a method in which readers unconsciously read their own assumptions, beliefs, or doctrines into the text. When that happens, interpretation can become less about listening to the text and more about confirming what the reader already believes. Exegetical conversations seek to take the more challenging but more rewarding path of listening carefully to the voices of the past. One of the most important insights in modern biblical study is that the Bible did not begin as a single book. What we now hold as a unified volume is actually a library of writings composed across many centuries by different authors who live in different historical circumstances. These writers were not sitting around a table designing a systematic theology. Many live generations apart. Some address specific crises within their communities. Others recorded wisdom, poetry, prophetic warnings, or narratives of faith and struggle. Even the collection of writings we now call the Bible emerged gradually through history in a process known as the formation of the biblical canon. The text circulated independently long before they were gathered together into the sacred library that later generations would recognize as scripture. Understanding this history opens the door to a deeper and more honest conversation about the Bible. It allows us to appreciate the diversity of voices within its pages. It encourages us to ask historical questions. It invites us to distinguish between what a text originally meant and how later communities interpreted it. These conversations are not meant to diminish the value of sacred writings. On the contrary, they allow the text to breathe again, to speak in their own voice rather than through layers of later assumptions. In this podcast series, we will explore passages, themes, and questions that have shaped centuries of religious thought. We will examine the historical setting of biblical writings, the literary forms they employ, and the philosophical insights they may contain. At times, these discussions may challenge long held interpretations. At other times, they may illuminate familiar passages in surprising ways. But always the purpose remains the same: to engage the text with honesty, curiosity, and intellectual integrity. The Bible has influenced civilizations, shaped cultures, inspired reformers, and steered the imagination of countless generations. Yet, for many modern readers, it remains surrounded by layers of mystery, doctrine, and controversy. Exegetical conversations seeks to open that space again, to create room for thoughtful exploration, respectful questioning, and meaningful reflection. Here, we do not assume that every question must have a predetermined answer. Instead, we approach the text as historical witness to humanity's ongoing search for meaning, morality, and the divine. In that spirit, these conversations invite you to merely, not to merely listen, but to think, to question, and perhaps to rediscover the ancient text with fresh eyes. Welcome to Exegetical Conversations. And as we proceed, there are some things we need to consider, things we need to know about the Bible, because it will be our foundation. It will be the main thing that we will be studying. One thing we must understand about the Bible is that it was not originally written with chapters, verses, headings, or subheadings. The text appeared as continuous scrolls, meant to be read or heard in extended form. Their familiar divisions were added in the 13th century by Stephen Langton, and the verse numbers for the New Testament were introduced in the 16th century by Robert Eschim. While these tools are helpful for reference, they sometimes interrupt the natural flow of thought and can unintentionally fragment arguments or narratives. Likewise, verses in the modern Bibles, such as those that summarize a miracle or a parable, are later editorial additions. They are not part of the inspired text, but interpretive guides inserted by translators and publishers, subtly shaping how readers approach a passage before they even begin reading it. It is also essential to remember that the Bible was not written in English. The Hebrew scriptures were composed primarily in Hebrew, with portions in Aramaic, while the New Testament was written in Koine Greek. Every English Bible is therefore a translation, and translation inevitably involves interpretation. Words do not always have exact equivalent across languages, and theological nuances can be influenced by translation choices. Furthermore, the Bible is not a single book, but a collection of writings, a library containing law, poetry, wisdom literature, prophecy, narrative epistles, and apocalyptic visions. Each genre must be read according to its literary form. Poetry should not be forced into literal prose, and apocalyptic symbolism should not be mistaken for modern historical reporting. The biblical writings were produced all over many centuries and reflect diverse historical and cultural settings. The world of ancient Israel differs significantly from first century Roman world of Jesus and the early church. Events such as the Babylonian exile and Roman occupation deeply shaped the theological reflections found in Scripture. The canon itself developed gradually as communities of faith recognized certain writings as authoritative over time. Moreover, many traditions circulated orally before being written down, which explains the repetition and patterned structures found in the text. The Bible was written for ancient audiences living within ancient cultural frameworks, including cosmologies and social structures very different from our own. When modern readers approach scripture without awareness of these realities, they seek imposing contemporary assumptions into ancient texts. A responsible reading requires humility, historical sensitivity, and a willingness to listen to the text within its original world before drawing conclusions for our own. Thank you. So, again, thank you for joining me on our first episode on these exegetical conversations. I have given an introduction to discuss about how we shall be going with these uh, conversations. And if you have questions, if you have requests, if you have anything at all, a reaction, you're welcome. And since I expect this to be a conversation, so I invite you to send me your questions, your thoughts, or anything that we can discuss about this particular subject. So until then, follow me and I will see you in our next episode. Again, thank you.